Wow. Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Thanks for tuning in. Once again, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. Today, just want to go ahead and just read some information to you, see what you guys think about it. You can take it how you like. I'm just going to show some references and going to show you that there's actually a lot of references saying the same thing about the Iroquois being the Romans of the West or the Romans of America. What I'm showing you guys here is a previous video I did called Iroquois, the Two Creators of the Constitution. And in that video, we do mention how similar the Great Law of Peace and the Magna Carta of the Romans is, and how they set up their government and everything, their senators, their democracy, just like the so-called Romans. Go ahead and check that video out if you haven't. That's something we're not going to probably mention today that much, but we go over it in this video very much, and how they adopted, the United States adopted the Constitution from the ideas and the government of the Iroquois, the Great Law of Peace. Now, also, I don't know if you noticed, but these are historic drawings of the Iroquois, or the Iroquois, the Six Nations, the different ones, right? The Mohawks, the Oneidas, the Senecas, and all the rest. And as you guys can see, they're wearing like a toga, like outfit with a cape. One of them is blue, one of them is red. A lot of the times they showed with red capes or red coats. They got the Robin Hood type shoes, Middle Ages type shoes. And as you guys can see, copper-colored tribes of America, swarthy people, right? This is another depiction of the Iroquois with the red coats, as they were supposedly helping the English or anybody that was there. But that might have been just their costume as they evolved. Here's an older image, I found online. This is a drawing of the four kings before they got kind of whitewashed. I'm going to show you what I mean. And as you guys can see, the garb, this is an Indian, an Iroquois. Look at the shoes. So this is what they actually dress like, a lot of them. This is another image we have here. It says later altered whitewash images. The four Indian kings, or four kings of the New World, were three Mohawk chiefs from one of the five nations of the Iroquois Confederacy named Mahican of the Algonquin peoples, whose portraits were painted by Jan Bettis in London to commemorate their travel from New York to 1710. Now they're saying, oh, they made them dress like that, but these are not the only depictions of the Iroquois dressed like this, and not the only person that's actually drawing them like this. All right, so this is supposed to be the whitewash ones, but either way, as you guys can see, you see the toga, you see they got like a sword, right? Now, who else kind of has this kind of costume, right? We got Roman soldiers, right? You see the red cape, all right? You see the red cape, the armor, and like the toga or this kind of skirt, right? The skirt. Now, what do you also notice about this is this helmet. They've been telling us all our lives is a helmet. Is it really a helmet? Or is it a Mohawk haircut? Mohawk. It's named Mohawk because the Mohawk, or a lot of the Iroquois, were known to rock their hair like that, guys. Mohawk, right? See? You guys see? Mohawk, go back. You see the helmet? Now you see some Roman soldiers, they even got feather headdresses. Look at that. Who do you think they're really depicting? So-called Romans. Remember, they got a fake history. Who are the real so-called Romans? See this one sideways? Is that hair or feathers? What are we really depicting? You see this one? Is that just a helmet? Or is that their hair? Is that their hair? Is that their hair? Right? You guys see? And you already know, look at this one. Wouldn't it be easier? You don't need too much hairspray like some people do. But yeah, a Mohawk hairstyle, right? A Mohawk hairstyle. Mohawk hairstyle, right? Mohawk hairstyle. Yeah. You see that? And if you look up Iro haircut, Iro is short for Iroquois, Iro haircut, and you get Mohawk, Iroquois, Iroquois cut. An Iroquois cut is a Mohawk. All right, a lot of the punk rockers like to rock this, but we know a lot of the American Indian nations and peoples rock the Mohawks, right? So-called Mohawks, as you guys can see here. And these people wearing Mohawks with their red capes and weapons, swords, right? Just like these guys, their red capes and their togas, and they got their swords and weapons too. This is Elysian. We're going to read about this later, who they are. All right. You see, he looks like a Roman soldier, or got the Roman. He also got the Mohawk, right? He also got the Mohawk, copper colored. What's the difference? Again, this is how they dressed. All right. Don't think savage. Don't think, just, half naked. That's not always the case. So we're going to get a lot of references. You guys decide at the end of the video what you think, but I'm just going to show you what I was finding. Everybody was kind of saying the same thing about how the Iroquois resemble the Romans in many things. I also found this interesting, which is this word, Seneca. I know that's not their original name, but the Seneca people, or Onondaga, Great Hill people, are a group of indigenous Iroquoian-speaking people. Historically lived south of Lake Ontario. They're part of the Iroquois League, so Seneca, right? Seneca. Just like Seneca the Younger, Seneca, Lucius Annius Seneca the Younger, usually known as mostly as Seneca. He's just Seneca. Seneca people. Seneca, why would they name him that? Was a Stoic philosopher of ancient Rome. This is a Roman, a statesman, dramatist, and in one work, satirist from the post-Augustan age of Latin literature. Seneca was born in Colonia Patricia Córdoba in Hispaniola, Hispania, and was trained in rhetoric and philosophy in Rome. What Rome? There's a Rome in New York, there's a Rome in Georgia. So Seneca, his father was Seneca the Elder. All right, Seneca the Elder. So there's a lot of Senecas. This word is involved in so-called Roman history. Why they name an Iroquois people after Roman words? Seneca, huh? Seneca. Just something to think about, guys. I'm not saying anything really. I just wanted to show you all these little coincidences I'm starting to notice. All right, what is that? That's just a Mohawk haircut. That's just a Mohawk haircut, okay? All right, Mohawk or Roman soldiers, right? Or Roman soldiers. Again, I'm just gonna read some things to you guys and you decide. Study more about them. If you see a comparison when you study Roman history, then if Romans are, made up, or they're really from the Middle Ages and they are different people than what we think, then who are the so-called real Romans in history? Gonna get into this book now. It's called The History of Montgomery Classis, RCA, to which is added sketches of Mohawk Valley men and events of early days, the Iroquois, Palatines, Indian missions, Tryon County Committee of Safety, Sir William Johnson, Joseph Brant, Arne Van Cooler, General Herkimer, Reformed Church in America, Doctrine and Progress, Revolutionary Residences, etc. Right? That's what it's in this book by W.N.P. Daly. All right, 1916. Says here some historical notes on the Mohawk Valley, and it's going to talk about the Iroquois, right? And we're going to go down to this is about page 164. The country of the Iroquois, called by them Haudenosaunee, extended from the Hudson to Lake Erie, from the St. Lawrence to the valleys of the Delaware, the Susquehanna, and the Allegheny, the whole of central and northern, and large parts of the southern and western New York. All right, so kind of going over the territories where these people kind of dwelled, inhabited, conquered. The territory of northern New York belonged principally to the Mohawks and Oneidas, the Onondagas owning a narrow strip along the eastern shore of Lake Ontario. The New York League of the Amerind, as their name signified, were of a superior type of a red man. All right, listen to this. Superior, huh? They matched the European in diplomacy. Just like the European, while in knowledge of human nature and sagacity, they were superior to the Europeans. Man to man, the Iroquois matched the white man, so-called white man, I mean the European. Man to man, the European matched the European. This is what it's telling you. These ain't savage people. In a certain sense, civilized, yet at heart barbarous, cruel, and savage, rapacious, and treacherous. And when they mean savage, it's because of the way they conquered other nations. The Indian had no peer in oration. Listen, the Indian had no peer in oration. The conviction of his free birth made him a proud man, and everywhere his ability was recognized. Here in the wilderness of what has become the Empire State, the Iroquois built up the strongest confederacy that existed in America, north of the Aztec monarchy in Mexico. Like the Aztecs, huh? It was an ideal condition of aboriginal life that the European man found when he came over the seas to dwell in the western land. Up to this time of Sullivan's expedition, 1779, which was the direct resultant of the Cherry Valley and Wyoming massacres in 1778, the Iroquois had ruled their vast unknown territory undisputedly for 5 centuries. They had held the gateway that opened into the Great West, and this made them arbiters between the great nations of the Old World, who in that day were fighting for supremacy, and the New. Among all the Amerind of the New World, there were none so politic and intelligent, none so fierce and brave, none with so many germs of heroic virtues mingled with their savage vices. We're going to learn about. As these people of the Longhouse, all other nations feared them. They overrun the country of the Hurons in 1650. In 1651, utterly destroyed the neutral nation. In 1652, exterminated the Eries, or the Cat Nation, huh? The nation of the cats, the Eries. Could that have been possibly maybe relatives of the Picts and the Highlanders who became the Clanchatan cats? Did they get overrun by Iroquois and other nations? And in 1672 made the Andastes a slave nation. The Andastes, did you even know about these people? The Iroquois made them slaves. As far west as the Mississippi and as far south as the Great Gulf was their war cry heard. The tribes along the Hudson and the nations in New England paid tribute to them, right? They paid tribute to them just like we're going to see. We know Romans, they collected tribute from all the people they conquered, right? Well, the Iroquois did the same. They were the conquerors of the New World. Again, they were the conquerors of the New World. It wasn't the so-called white man. They were the Romans of the West. The Romans of the West. The Iroquois are the Romans of the West, of whom Father Ragueneau wrote in 1650. My pen has no ink black enough to describe the fury of the Iroquois. They built their castles, villages, villages on the banks of the streams, lived in long, narrow houses and raised vegetables and tobacco. For more than 200 miles along the narrow valley of the Mohawk stretched their longhouse. The Mohawks, Ganeaga Ono, example people, possessors of flint, guarded the eastern door of this longhouse, while the Seneca, don't the Romans have that word? Senecas, doesn't a famous Roman have that name? Nandawa Ono, example, great hill people, kept watch at the west. Between these doors of their country dwelled the Oneidas, Onajote, Kaono, example, granite people, the Ono Nodagas, or Nundo Ga Ono, example, people of the hills, the Cayugas, Guenu Guenono, example, people of the mucky land, and the Tuscaroras, Tuscao Weono, example, shirt-wearing people. And again, the Tuscaroras, they joined the Iroquois Confederacy. They were coming from the eastern woodlands. Of their system of government, their festivals and religious beliefs, and their social life is not on our purpose to speak. All right, so just want to go ahead and read that, again to you. This is one reference. We're going to get many. Again, they were the Romans of the West. Now, guys, we're learning that quite possibly the Romans are not even a real nation or historically really existed like they told us. Then who are the real Romans if these people are being called the Romans of the West? We're going to continue. Found this over at Quora.com. Somebody's asking or saying the English and French colonists viewed the Iroquois as the Romans of the New World. The Romans of the New World. Does this imply the Iroquois were seen as greater than the Aztecs or Incans? Hey, what if there was the same? You know, remember the Aztec and the Incas were latecomers, Johnny latecomers to those regions they settled in. But I just wanted to show you that this is a thing. Many people were comparing them to the Romans. All right, going to get into this book now. It's called View of the Climate and Soil of the United States of America, to which are annexed some accounts of Florida, the French colony on the Scioto, certain Canadian colonies, and the savages or natives. Translated from the French of C.F. Volney, member of the Conservative Senate and the French National Institute, and honorary member of the American Philosophical Society at the Philadelphia, the Asiatic Society at Calcutta, the Athenaeus of Avignon, Alençon, with maps and plates. This is from 1804. We go to page 476, and it says here, the grounds of comparison I lay down are so true that the analogy reaches even to their philosophical and religious opinions. For all the principles of the Stoic school of the Greeks are found in the practice of the American savages. We're going to see specifically at the end who he was talking about when he's saying what Indians. And if any should lay hold of this argument, to impute to the savages the merit of being philosophers, I would retort the reason and say, we ought on the contrary to conclude that a state of society in which precepts so repugnant to human nature were invented for the purpose of rendering life supportable must have been in order of things and government not less miserable than the savage state, and my opinion would be supported by the whole history of these Grecian tribes, even in their most brilliant periods. He's saying they were savages too, just like, you know, when we start comparing, and by the uninterrupted series of their wars, seditions, democratic massacres, oligarchist and tyrannical proscriptions, etc., up to the time of their subjugation by those other savages of Italy, called the so-called Romans, right? Who in their character, politics, and aggrandizement have a striking resemblance to the Six Nations, all right? To the Six Nations, to the Iroquois Confederacy. These savage so-called Grecian and Roman tribes, the Romans were savage. Remember, these were conquerors, made other people pay tribute to them. That's what the Iroquois did. And this guy's telling you, they are just like that. What? Their character, their politics, their aggrandizement, a striking resemblance to the Six Nations, who the Romans and these so-called Greeks. Remember what we're learning in these false chronologies. If we know there's fake Romans and fake Greeks, then who are the real ones? I'm going to get into this book. It's from the publications of the Champlain Society, Customs of the American Indians compared with the customs of primitive times. This is the original cover in French. Okay. This is the year right here, which means 1724. So this was originally written in 1724. And again, this is the title, edited and translated by William N. Fenton and Elizabeth L. Moore. We're on volume 1 from 1974 edition of that translation. Over on page 287, it says here, government of the Iroquois and Huron. Whatever the origin of the Iroquois, whatever it is, they don't know, and Huron may be, they have kept this form of government in its first simplicity, for besides this genocracy, which is exactly the same as that of the Lycians, in which the care of affairs is in the men's hands only by way of procuration. All the villages govern themselves in the same way by themselves, and as if they were independent of each other. We see also in each the same distribution of families, the same civil laws, the same order, so that anyone who sees one sees them all. When, however, affairs of interest to the whole of the tribe are to be discussed, they unite in a general council to which the deputies of each village go. This is done with so much equality and zeal for the common welfare, that there results from it a harmony and an admirable unanimity which works for the safety of the tribe, and which for that reason nothing can break asunder. All right, so again, it's just like the Lycians, right? Who's the Lycians? Says here the Lycians, so-called Greek, is the name of various peoples who lived at different times in Lycia, right? Anatolia, a geopolitical area in Anatolia or Asia Minor. So remember, Romans conquered a lot of lands, made a lot of people pay tribute to them. But I want to show you right here, it says a Lycian warrior. And as you guys can see, he's got the whole Roman soldier, gear with the mohawk. Yeah, the mohawk, you already know. It's the same thing. There's here Kisilbel el Mali, tomb warrior. So again, this is what they look like. You see copper colored. According to Herodotus, the culture and customs of the Lycians resembled a hybrid of Cretan culture like that of the Hermeli and that of the neighboring Carians. Carians or American Indians, possibly ancient sea navigators from America. Go back and check out some of my Atlantis videos. We go over who the Carians possibly might be. Remember, they just all of a sudden showed up in Asia Minor. They don't know from where. And again, and many legends coming from so-called Atlantis. All right. So this is another archaeological, supposedly monument of the Lycian people. And I just want you guys to notice how they have their tunicas, right? Just like we showed earlier, right? You see how the Iroquois used to dress with the capes, all right? With the capes, just like these Lycians are represented here. Even looks like they got feathered, what you call it, covers on the bottom parts of their body. Like how they depict Indians with the feathered clothing, or even tobacco leaves. What is that? But as you can see, just like the Iroquois with the capes, you see the two of them with the capes. Same thing, two of them with capes. The Iroquois dressed like that too. Yeah, so just to add to what we just read, this book right here says savages, Romans, and these despots are thinking about others from mountain to herder. Robert Laney. All right, that's the book we're gonna get into. Over in chapter 6 of this book, it says here the long lost Lycians. Remember, we just read about them, right? So they're gonna actually quote the book we just read, Customs of the American Indians compared with the customs of primitive times, and they're gonna add a little something here. It says here, given Lafitau's post-Diluvian paradigm, the Iroquois, indeed all Native Americans, had to have their origins in the Old World. So the book we were just reading from the 1700s, Lafitau was actually saying that throughout the book, possibly connections to the Old World. Remember, America is the true Old World. In his efforts to uncover the mystery of their origins, Lafitau, very much like his 19th century successors, focused on the Iroquois system of matrilineal descent, or in his terms, genococracy. Lafitau's extensive classical education had in fact prepared him for such a discovery. Herodotus had described such a system among the Lycians of Asia Minor. On these grounds, Lafitau speculated that the Iroquois were none other than the long-lost Lycians, who had migrated across Asia through Siberia to America. He dismissed the idea that they might be one of the lost tribes of Israel as preposterous. All right, he's saying they were the long-lost Lycians. All right, remember what we learned about them and what they look like. A little more ahead in the book, it says a century after Lafitau, Lewis Henry Morgan, this is a whole other person, right? In 1985, would use his own ethnographic research among the Iroquois to suggest that the institutions of their society in the realms of government, family, and property provided a glimpse of the prehistory of the Greeks and Romans. There is a brief passage where, for a moment, Lafitau also self-consciously rereads the Greeks in the light of his direct experience of the Iroquois. I took particular pleasure in reading Apollonius of Rhodes' poem on the expedition of the Argonauts, because of the perfect resemblance which I find in all the rest of the work between these famous heroes of antiquity and the present day barbarians in their voyages and military undertakings. Hercules and Jason, Castor and Pollux, Ceres and Calais, Orpheus and Mopsus, and all other half-gods who rendered themselves immortal, and to whom people have burned incense only too readily, are so well represented by a troop of rascals and miserable savages that I seem to see pass before my eyes. All right, those famous conquerors of the Golden Fleece, but this resemblance lowers the conception which I had formed of the glory of these heroes, and I am ashamed for the greatest kings and princes in the world that they have thought themselves honored to be compared to them. The famous ship Argo, which has for anchor a stone tied to a laurel root cord, to which Hercules' weight alone served a ballast, and which the Argonauts carried on their shoulders for 12 days and 12 nights in the Libyan fables, has nothing to distinguish it from a dugout, or at most from a longboat chalupe. Listen, told you all these tales, all these Greek tales, that was really happening here. You know, that mysterious land, right, where all these people traveled to, right? This Hercules himself, who chose his place on the benches with the others and took an oar in his hand, who plunged into the woods to make an oar of a little fir tree after breaking his, who every time that they selected a lamp to camp lay on the shore in the open air on a bed of leaves or branches, is a savage in all ways and is not superior to them, the Indians, right? Just like the Indians, and again, they're talking about the Iroquois Confederacy here. Continuing, this is the book, The Life and Writings of DeWitt Clinton by William W. Campbell, author of Border Warfare of New York or Annals of Tryon County. This is from 1849. On page 218, it says here, the Hurons of the island of Orleans in 1656, knowing no other way to save themselves from destruction, solicited admission into the canton of the Mohawks and were accepted. But at the instance of the French, they declined their own proposal. On this occasion, the Mohawks continued their ravages and compelled acquiescence. They sent 30 of their warriors to Quebec, who took them away with the consent of the Governor General. He, in fact, not daring to refuse, after having addressed him in the following terms of proud defiance, which cannot but bring to our recollection similar instances of Roman spirit when Rome was free. Lift up thy arms, Onontio, and allow thy children, whom thou holdest pressed to thy bosom, to depart. For if they are guilty of any imprudence, have reason to dread, lest in coming to chastise them, my blows fall on thy head. Like the Romans also, they treated their vassal nations with extreme rigor. If there were any delay in the render of the annual tribute, military execution followed, and the wretched delinquents frequently took refuge in the house of the English to escape from destruction. On all public occasions they took care to demonstrate their superiority and dominion, and at all times they called their vassals to an awful account if guilty of violating the injunctions of the Great Council. All right, just like the Romans, all right, the Hurons and these Iroquois and these Mohawk tribes, acting again just like the Romans. That's how they treated their vassal nations with extreme rigor. Continuing a little ahead, says, with savages in general, this ferocious propensity, they're talking about just going out to war and just, taking over tribes, was impelled by a blind fury and was but little regulated by the dictates of skill and judgment. On the contrary, with the Iroquois, war was an art. All their military movements were governed by a system and policy. They never attacked a hostile country until they had sent out spies to explore and to designate its vulnerable points, and whenever they encamped, they observed the greatest circumspection to guard against surprise, whereas the other savages only sent out scouts to reconnoitre, but they never went as far from the camp, and if they returned without perceiving any signs of an enemy, the whole band went quietly to sleep and were often the victims of their rash confidence. Whatever superiority of force the Iroquois might have, they never neglected the use of stratagems. They employed all the crafty wiles of the Carthaginians, just like the Carthaginians. The cunning of the fox, the ferocity of the tiger, and the power of the lion were united in their conduct. They preferred to vanquish their enemy by taking him off his guard, by involving him in an ambuscade, by falling upon him in the hour of sleep. But when emergencies rendered it necessary for them to face him in the open field of battle, they exhibited a courage and contempt of death which have never been surpassed. A little further down says Herodotus informs us that the Scythians, who were in all probability the ancestors of the greater part of our red men, or the other way around. All right, you hear that? Drank the blood of their enemies and suspended their scalps from the bridle of their horses for a napkin and a trophy, that they used their skulls for drinking vessels and their skins as a covering to their horses. In the war between the Carthaginians and their mercenaries, Gisco, a Carthaginian general, and 700 prisoners, according to Polybius, were scalped alive, and in return, Spendius, a general of the mercenaries, was crucified, and the prisoners taken in the war thrown alive to the elephants. All right, again, scalping, don't Indians scalp? From these celebrated nations, we may derive the practice of scalping, so abhorrent to humanity. And it is not improbable, considering the maritime skill and distant voyages of the Phoenicians and Carthaginians, that America derives part of its population from that source by water, and is undoubtedly has from the northeast parts of Asia by land, with the exception of a narrow strait. All right, so they're saying, hey, the Indians scalped too. They must have learned from the Phoenicians and Carthaginians who were coming over here. And again, they're all seeing this in reverse, right, guys? They all see it in reverse. Says here on page 210, says the remaining and much greater part of the state was occupied by the Romans of this Western world, who composed a federal republic and were denominated by the English the Five Nations, the Six Nations, the Confederates, by the French the Iroquois, by the Dutch the Maquas or Mahaquase, by the Southern Indians the Massawamaks, by themselves the Mingos or Mingoyans, and sometimes the Aganushan or United People, and their confederacy they styled the Kenuntioni. All right, again, the Iroquois, who are they? The Romans of this Western world. So the ones in the Eastern world, so-called East, are fake. And who's the real ones? Continuing, page 217, it says, there is a striking similitude between the Romans and the Confederates or the Iroquois, all right? Not only in their martial spirit and rage for conquest, but in their treatment of the conquered. Like the Romans, they not only adopted individuals, but incorporated the remnant of their vanquished enemies into their nation. They made them citizens, just like the Romans, by which they continually recruited their population, just like the Khazar Empire, exhausted by endless and wasting wars, and were enabled to continue their career of victory and desolation. If their unhappy victims hesitated or refused, they were compelled to accept of the honors of adoption. We get into this book now. It's called The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State. This is a pretty good book, for other references or topics, but, we're going to stick to the topic. This is by Frederick Engels, and this is from 1909. We'll go over to page 102. It says here, Chapter 3, the Iroquois Gens. All right. Before I read this, I just want to read something he says about the origin of the so-called gens. Morgan says, the gens of the American Indians furthermore assisted him in gaining another important step in the field under the investigation. He found that this gens, in parentheses, organized in conformity with maternal law, was the original form out of which later on the gens by paternal law developed. Listen, such as we find it among the civilized nations of antiquity, the Greek and Roman gens, an unsolved riddle to all historians up to our time, found its explanation in the Indian gens. A new foundation was discovered for the entire primeval history. All right, listen to what he's telling you here. They got that from here. What is a gens? In ancient Rome, a gens was a family consisting of individuals who shared the same nomen gentilicium, and who claim descent from a common ancestor. They didn't necessarily have to look the same. They explain all this. The word gens is sometimes translated as race or nation, meaning a people descended from a common ancestor rather than sharing a common physical trait. It can also be translated as clan, kin, or tribe, although the word tribus has its separate and distinct meaning in Roman culture. So the gens Fabia are supposed to be the oldest of these families. When you go into Fabia gens, one of the most ancient patricial families of ancient Rome, the gens played a prominent part in history soon after the establishment of the Republic. Background: the family is generally thought to have been counted amongst the gentes maiores, the most prominent of the patrician houses at Rome, together with the Aemili, Claudi, Corneli, Manli, and Valeri, but no list of the gentes maiores has survived, and even the number of families so designated is a complete mystery. They don't really know. It's what he was just saying in the book. They don't really know how it all started, but they seem to have found it amongst the Indians. He's saying it helped them understand it. So going back, so we now come to another discovery of Morgan that is at least as important as the reconstruction of the primeval form of the family from the systems of kingship. It is the proof that the sex organizations within the tribe of North American Indians designated by animal names are essentially identical with the genera of the Greeks and the gentes of the Romans. Listen, especially the Iroquois, that the American form is the original from which the Greek and Roman forms were later derived. All right, it started here. America's the true old world. Who are the real so-called Greeks, so-called Romans? Those ain't real nations. Remember, we've been breaking this down little by little. We're going to get more and more deeper as we start breaking down these false chronologies as well. It's just going to get more and more obvious that that's a glorified history. They put them in ancient times when they were most likely in the Middle Ages. When did the Iroquois start popping into the scene? Something to look into. So again, the American form is the original from which the Greek and Roman forms were later derived. That the whole organization of Greek and Roman society during primeval times in gens, phratry, and tribe finds its faithful parallel in that of the American Indians. That the gens is an institution common to all barbarians up to the time of civilization, at least so far as our present sources of information reach. This demonstration has cleared at a single stroke the most difficult passages of remotest ancient Greek and Roman history. At the same time, it has given us unexpected information concerning the fundamental outlines of the constitution of society in primeval times before the introduction of the state. Simple as the matter is, after we have once found it out, still it was only lately discovered by Morgan. In his work of 1871, he had not yet unearthed this mystery. Its revelation has completely silenced for the time being those generally so overconfident English authorities on primeval history. All right, this is big, what this guy was, investigating, realizing, showing, and this was never told to us. Over in chapter 6, we continue. It says the Roman gens is recognized as an institution identical with the Grecian gens, the Grecian gens being a continuation of the same social unit, the primordial form of which we found among the American Indians. The same holds naturally good of the Roman gens, and we can be more concise in its treatment. At least during the most ancient times of the city, the Roman gens had the following constitution. So it starts breaking down some of the constitution. I'm just going to read some examples. So number 1, mutual right of inheritance for Gentiles. The wealth remained in the gens. Paternal law being already enforced in the Roman, the same as in the Grecian gens. All right. And then it says possession of a common burial ground. The patrician gens, Claudia, on immigrating into Rome from Regalia, was assigned to a separate lot of a land and received its own burial ground in the city. Then it says number 3, common religious rights. These are well known under the name of Sacra Gentilicia. Number 4, obligation not to intermarry in the gens. All right. So we're just going to read the main ones. Number 5, a common piece of land. In primeval days, this was always obtained when the tribal territory was first divided. Number 6, duty of the Gentiles to mutually protect and assist one another. Number 7, right to bear the Gentile name. This was enforced until the time of the emperors. Number 8, right of adopting strangers into the gens. All right. Number 9, the right to elect and depose chiefs is not mentioned anywhere. All right. So it says, such were the constitutional rights of a Roman gens. With the exception of the completed transition to paternal law, they are the true image of the rights and duties of an Iroquois gens. Exactly the same. Here, also, the Iroquois is still plainly visible. All right, still plainly visible. He was seeing it in the Iroquois. Continuing, it says here, the history of the 5 Indian nations, dependent on the province of New York by Cadwallader Colden. Says this is reprinted exactly from Bradford's New York edition from 1727. Okay, 1727. We go all the way to page 24. Says here, chapter 2. And it says, but the next spring, the viceroy and the governor with 28 companies of foot and all the inhabitants of the colony marched into the country of the Mohawks with a design to destroy this nation, which by the war not only prevented their commerce with other Indians, but even prevented the settlement of the colony. This certainly was a bold attempt to march thus above 250 leagues from Quebec through unknown forest, but all they were able to do was to burn some of their villages and to murder some old men that, like the old Roman senators, just like the old Roman senators, would rather die than desert their houses, just like the old Roman senators. I'm going to get into this book now. It's called Iroquois, Past and Present. This is from 1901, Edward H. Brush. Again, Iroquois, Past and Present by Edward Hale Bush. Over on page 8, it says here, it is midwinter, and a cheerless journey indeed it is likely to prove, but nevertheless it will afford us an opportunity to see and observe these remarkable people, who it is said by some deserve the title of Romans of the Western world. We're talking about the Iroquois, Romans of the Western world. It says here, thelastdialogue.tumblr.com. All right, what is this? And it says, the Iroquois Confederacy, the Red Romans, and the Red Coats. Who is the real Red Coats? The Savage Empire, or the Red Roman Empire. The Red Coats. Look how they're dressed. Get into this other book. It says The Iroquois, or The Bright Side of Indian Character by Minnie Myrtle. This is from 1855. On page 123, it says here, a war legend. In this story is developed the principle upon which war was waged among the Iroquois. Revenge for a great injury was the cause of the beginnings of strife. The subjugation for the sake of peace, like the Romans of old, and the Iroquois have been justly called the Romans of America. Again, the Romans of America. So if the Romans of Europe are fake, then which ones are the so-called real Romans, people of the promised land? There was something in their proud and dignified bearing, in their national policy and their warlike exploits, like the people who extended their arms into every civilized and uncivilized land. All right, the Romans of America, the Iroquois. I'm gonna get into this book now. It's an encyclopedia, actually, the New American Encyclopedia, a popular dictionary of general knowledge, edited by George Ripley and Charles A. Dana, Volume 9, From Haine to Jersey City. That's the words we're going to get into, and this is the year right here. So over on page 612 of this book, we go to the word Iroquois, right here on the right, and I'm going to read. It says, a group of American Indians, originally embracing 5 and afterwards 8 nations, who planted themselves in western New York and on the shores of lakes Ontario and Erie, where they were surrounded by the Algonquin Lenape. These nations were the Mohawks, Oneidas, Onondagas, Cayugas, and Senecas, to whom the Tuscaroras were added as a 6th nation in 1712. In 1723 or 28, the Huron tribes were received, and as an 8th nation, the Algonquin Mississaugas from Canada.
These were collectively called Mingos by the English. The Iroquois Confederacy was the most permanent and powerful of the savage government found in North America. Seeing the other tribes destroyed,
Continues as the Iroquois formed themselves into a confederacy in which the principles of military glory and tribal union were carried to the highest Indian perfection. They pursued war and hunting, but returned to their fixed villages, where their families followed agricultural pursuits. In the Iroquois nations, we see the action of principles afterward embodied in the Constitution of the United States, all right? Just like the Magna Carta, this law of peace or government. Each canton or tribe was independent, and each was bound to the others of the Confederacy by ties of general interest and honor, very much in the same manner as the United States of America are held together. Each had a voice in the general councils and possessed a kind of veto power. Matters of common interest were decided in general meeting of the sachems of all the nations commonly held at Onondaga. They followed the maxim used by the ancient Romans. Look, listen. They followed the maxim used by the ancient Romans of encouraging other nations to incorporate with them and adopted captive people into their confederacy. And this way, their strength became such that in the early part of the 17th century, they had conquered all the neighboring tribes, all right, conquerors. And doubtless, in 100 years, had the whites not colonized America, check that, if Europeans hadn't come, not so-called whites, if the Europeans hadn't come, they would have absorbed all the nations from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. You hear this? Their sachems were constituted by the general voice admitting their courage and wisdom. They lived in a true Roman simplicity. Again, they live in a true Roman simplicity, accepting no salary, disregarding profit, and giving away their share of the plunder of war or the perquisites of peace. They despised every unworthy action and thought themselves fully rewarded by the love and respect of the people, feeling themselves by nature and by their political system superior to other nations. They possess a courage which made them the terror of other tribes. The time has been when a single Mohawk was enough to put to flight 100 of the New England Indians, and when an old chief in the poorest custom issued his orders to tributary nations with the unquestioned authority of a Roman dictator, just like a Roman dictator. Guys, do you guys hear and see all the comparisons to so-called Romans? As among all brave nations, women was more respected among the Iroquois than in any other Indian tribes. The Iroquois matrons possessed a conservative power in the state, being represented in the public councils and exercising a veto influence on the declaration of peace and war. All right, so all right, just like Roman dictators, they lived in a true Roman simplicity, and they followed the maxim used by the ancient Romans. We're just talking about the Iroquois. All right, gonna go over to this book now. It's called Magazine of Western History by Adolphe Francis Alphonse Bandelier. And here's the other cover right here, Magazine of Western History, Volume 1, from 1884 to 1885, so November 1884 to April 1885. On page 136 of this book, it says oratory was not alone a natural gift, but an art among the Iroquois. It enjoined painful study, unremitting practice, and sedulous observation of the style and methods of the best masters. Red Jacket did not rely upon his native power alone, but cultivated the art with the same assiduity that characterized the great Athenian orator. Just like an Athenian orator, Red Jacket, the red coats, the red nation, the red Roman Empire. The Iroquois, as their earliest English historian observed, cultivated an Attic or classic elegance of speech which entranced every ear among their red auditory. Skipping down here, says the great incentive to eloquence, patriotism was not lacking to the Ciceros of the wilds. The Ciceros of the wilds, no nation of which we have a record was dominated in larger degree by this lofty sentiment. They were proud of their history and their achievements, devotedly attached to their institutions, and enthusiastic at the mention of the long line of chieftains and sages who, from the era of Hiawatha, had assisted and erected this grand Indian empire. empire. The time will come when the institutions, policy, eloquence, and achievements of this remarkable people will be the themes of study for the youth in our schools of learning. And that's what we're doing right now. We're finally telling a more truer history. There will come a time when this will be the themes of study for the youth in our schools of learning, the unvarying courtesy, sobriety, and dignity of their convocations led one of their learned Jesuit historians to liken them to the Roman Senate, just like the Roman Senate. Great orators like Athenian orators. We're just talking about the Iroquois, so-called. Real quick, right here we have Hendrik Tejanoguin, whose name had several spelling variations, was a Mohawk leader and a member of the Bear Clan. He resided at Kanajahati, or at the Upper Mohawk Castle in Colonial New York. He was the Speaker of the Mohawk Council. Hendrik formed a close alliance with Sir William Johnson, the Superintendent of Indian Affairs in North America. Right? He was born in Westfield, Massachusetts. By the Mohawk matrilineal kingship system, he was considered born into his mother's Bear Clan. So this is, as it says here, the brave old Hendrik, the great Sakim, or chief of the Mohawk Indians, a hand-tinted engraving of Mohawk leader Hendrik Tejanoguin, published in London in 1755, based on an earlier lost portrait. Where's the real earlier lost portrait? You guys see that? Lost portrait, huh? A facsimile, supposedly. Supposed to be the exact copy. What if it was a little more swarty? But I wanted to show you, look how he's dressed. This is a Mohawk, right? The red coats are coming. The red coats are coming. Red jacket, red coats, red empire. Yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and look into this book. Right now it's called American Indians and British Art, 1700 to 1840 by Stephanie Pratt, University of Oklahoma Press, 1958. Thought this was very interesting what they're saying here. They're going to talk about some figures, some illustrations we're going to see. Let's read what it says first. The second set of illustration comes from an illustrated edition of Gertrude published in 1822. Richard Westall designed two plates to do with the figure of Watalisi for engraving. The first depicting the same meeting between the four protagonists chosen by the Sketching Society. The second showing Utalisi's return on the eve of the massacre. Figures 5.7 and 5.8. In the second plate, figure 5.7, the characters are arranged against a long, flat expanse of wall and in frieze-like composition. The area around the figures is simplified, stripped of detail, while Utalisi's draped garments give him the appearance of a Roman figure dressed in chiton rather than that of an aged chieftain of the Oneida tribe. The incongruity of curly-headed, bearded, and classicized figure has not troubled Westall in the creation of his American Indian figure. Oneida, all right, real quick, Oneida people are a Native American tribe and First Nations band. They are one of the 5 founding nations of the Iroquois Confederacy, so they are part of the Iroquois. Again, they're making him look like a Roman figure. They're saying he may have been thinking more of an amalgamated type of noble savage in his design that would draw on a number of visual types, as well as on more direct experiences with supposed different peoples from diverse areas around the globe, including oceanic peoples. All right, so let's get to the images, right? So this is one of the images. This is an Indian they're depicting. All right, you guys heard, right? This is an Indian. Look how he's dressed. Again, just like they're dressed. These are Iroquois. Just like he's dressed. That's an Iroquois with the so-called toga. That's an Iroquois. All Iroquois nations. All right, so-called toga, red coat, a cape. Looking very Roman-like. Very Roman-like. And the bottom says 5.7, the chief, his old bewildered head, withdrew and grabs his arm and looked him through. All right, the chief. And then we go to the next figure. And it says, Gertrude of Wyoming and Other Poems by Thomas Campbell. And here we have another American Indian, and look what he's dressed like. Now look at the garb, the toga, the cape, look at the shoes. Go right back to this. It's the same. It's the exact same. All right. Look at the shoes, the Robin Hood shoes. You guys see that? Middle Ages, medieval times. Go back to the image. It's the exact same. That's how he's depicted in American Indian. Well, that's what they look like. At least the Iroquois, right? All right, we're gonna get into this book real quick. It's called "The Storied Landscape of Iroquois: History, Conquest, and Memory in the Native Northeast." We're in chapter 4 of this book. It says the decline and fall of the Romans of the West. The Romans of the West. It says here, but this new Republican continental empire was not the first that Americans had imagined as emanating from the lands of New York State. Since the 18th century, with the encouragement of Haudenosaunee leaders, Euro-Americans had viewed Iroquois as the hub of an Indian empire that controlled much of America's eastern woodlands. They knew something of this empire's history, stretching back into the early 17th century when the French had first encountered the Haudenosaunee. During the early Republic, New York's Governor DeWitt Clinton would bestow upon the Haudenosaunee, the so-called Iroquois, an imperial title, Romans of the Western World. Yet travelers reported signs that an even more ancient empire had once existed, perhaps also centered in New York and connected to the same lands where future cities in Ohio would prosper. Once the Erie Canal linked the Great Lakes states with New York City, on the eastern shore of Seneca Lake, Watson's party discovered seemingly ancient ruins, which the members interpreted as a fortification measuring 220 yards long and 55 yards wide. The settlement was clearly long abandoned, for old trees grew upon its banks. Walking to the center of the ruins, they noticed a flat stone situated on a small elevation. Someone had carved a design, perhaps some kind of hieroglyph, about a half-inch deep into the stone. All right, these inscriptions we've been finding, right? We've been talking about in many videos. Watson and his companions puzzled over its meaning for some time before giving up. They then explored about half a mile to the south of the main ruins and found a crescent-shaped out-of-work which concluded their search. This exploration marked the beginning of public interest in Iroquois, ancient landscape. In the October 1793 issue of the New York Magazine, Henry Livingston, a poet and Van Cortlandt's cousin, wrote an account of the discovery. While reasonably certain that the Indians had built the ruins, Livingston nevertheless alluded to the emerging mystery about America's distant past. He noted, "It's remarkable that in the enquiries the travelers made concerning these singular constructions among the surrounding Onondagos and other nations, they were so far from receiving any information, traditionary or otherwise, that the natives themselves had never noticed it." Subsequent Euro-American writers echoed Livingston's claims. Across Iroquois, they found dozens of substantial ruins, but nobody knew who built them, or so the Americans claimed. Intellectuals searched for an ancient history comparable to Europe's, and they found it in Indian earthworks spread throughout the frontier. These discoveries raised the question of who the real Romans of the West had been. All right, body bag for the illusion. Who the real Romans of the real Romans had been. Early archaeologists largely dismissed the possibility of Indian origins for these ruins and instead searched for medieval European architects. Listen, after exhausting all European options, investigators searched for a supposed lost race, frequently remembered as the Mound Builders. DeWitt Clinton became the most important proponent of this vanished race theory. The debate about the ancient landscape became a conversation about Iroquois' future. By claiming that Indians lacked the ability to build these supposedly pre-Indian ruins, Americans denied a possible future for Native Americans on the new civilized landscape of America. So they're talking about, later on generations that came. Yeah, they're telling you, we didn't build those, those were there in ancient times. However, the Indians remained, and they knew who really built the villages, fortifications, and burial mounds encountered by Euro-American settlers. overlooked by historians then and now. These Indian traditions eventually appeared in one of the earliest published Native American histories, David Cusick's Sketches of the Ancient History of the Six Nations, first published in 1826. Cusick's history paid particular attention to the landscape of Iroquois, which recalled the past greatness of the Haudenosaunee as the true Romans of this Western world. These two interpretations set the terms for debating the total reinvention of the great island, its origins, and its future. It says here, the League of the Iroquois. This essay is provided courtesy of the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History. This is the original. And down here it says Gilder Lehrman Collection, Letter to William Johnson, British Commissioner of Northern Indian Affairs, 1761. It says, following the American Revolution, which divided the Six Nations, depleted their numbers, and devastated their homeland, the Haudenosaunee revived and remained diplomatically significant when a delegation visited the United States Capitol in Philadelphia in 1792. It was received lavishly, its chiefs referred to as princes. Philip Freneau, editor of the National Gazette, objected, and in keeping with the times, relabeled them Republicans rather than aristocrats or monarchy men. New York statesman DeWitt Clinton soon transformed them into avatars of imperial rather than republican Rome. Listen, addressing the New York Historical Society in 1811, Clinton famously called the historic Iroquois the Romans of this Western world. The father of American ethnology, Lewis H. Morgan, similarly deployed the metaphor in his classic work, League of the Haudenosaunee, or Iroquois, 1851, inventing a Pax Iroquoia to resemble the Pax Romana of the ancient world. All right, so for the dismount, before we go, all right, I hope you guys enjoyed the reading. You know, all these references of the Iroquois being referred to as the Romans of America, the Romans of the West, and their whole law, their whole government, the way they live, the way they break down their clans and tribes, their gens. It's all like the Romans. How they're great orators and all that, and how they conquest people, rule over people. You know, just like the Romans and Greeks, a lot of them. So, you know, just leave you with that thought. Now, I just want to remind you, you know, this is images of the Chicago's World Fairs. You know, real quick, we're gonna take a look at a image right here. Do you guys see that? That's not ancient Rome. That's Chicago. You know, and the Iroquois would be kind of like up there trying to take over. And, you know, who's to say who really built these buildings? We know the whole story behind the World Fairs and all the research that's going on there on the internet. So you guys already know. But just the time to think about, right? We're going to look at, I mean, you guys know this looks just like Roman architecture, right? A lot of this stuff. You guys see? We're going to go ahead and look at some images in color. All right, so as you guys can see, you know, just some images I colorized, some of the World Fairs. Some of these are in Chicago, some of them in different places. All right, but just so you can see, doesn't this look like Roman? Look at the obelisk. They're trying to tell us, you know, they just built these and then they destroyed it. This was late 1800s, early 1900s. But, you know, this is what they had in the World Fairs, guys. Look at what it appears to be so-called Roman aggression. So-called, right? And then remember what we're learning about the false chronology. They're saying the architecture is resembling a lot of the Middle Age stuff. And there's like no archaeology or, you know, progress, signs of progress, people in the 300 years that are missing in the so-called Dark Ages. So it seems that everything's really happening in the Middle Ages, so-called medieval times. All right, again, this is all in the United States. All these cities that look like old world cities, all these fairs, supposedly they're just made out of wood and stuff. You know, this is majestic buildings. They can't even build these right now. A lot of it, again, looking like old world architecture. Old world architecture. Shout out to all the channels and all the investigators out there doing the mud flood and old world buildings and technology videos. Very good investigations. It's very interesting. I definitely watch all that info. You know, here's some, again, images of some of these places in color that I was able to colorize. You guys can see very majestic looking, very Romanesque, classic.
architecture. They can't even mimic this stuff anymore. I think this one's in San Francisco, in California. Not sure, but a lot of these are in different places, as you guys can see. Look at these buildings looking like Roman, Vatican, Cathedral, you know. I also want to remind you guys I have the videos which we made of the Tucson crosses. What they found is Roman, right? Appearing to be Roman, Latin, Hebrew inscriptions on these, and their date. Where they found these artifacts shows a very old date before Columbus, so it's very controversial. We read a great book, and we're reading about the kings of Rhoda, all right? Tucson, Arizona, Roman Hebrews, as you see here, ancient Romans and prehistoric discoveries in Arizona, the Tucson crosses. Part 2, Tucson Calelus, the Promised Land, Roman Hebrews in ancient America, Theodorus and the Toltecs. All right, so make sure you guys check it out. You know, it might link up to what we're learning today with the Iroquois, you know, who are the so-called real Romans, the so-called real Greeks. All right, also want to emphasize the Mi'kmaq hieroglyphics. So it's Mi'kmaq hieroglyphic writing or suckerfish script. Gonwejui was a writing system for the Mi'kmaq language. All right, later superseded by various Latin scripts, which are currently in use. Mi'kmaq are a Canadian First Nation whose homeland called Mi'kmaqui overlaps much of the Maritime Province, especially of all of Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and parts of New Brunswick and Newfoundland, Labrador. So is it related? You know, what I'm showing you is look at a lot of it starts looking almost like Latin, but they're saying this is a ancient type of Egyptian script, long forgotten. It hasn't been in use, and the Mi'kmaq seems to have been using it. And this is the same writing supposedly that they found in the gold tablets, right, that Joseph Smith found for the Mormon Bible. This is the writing, all right. Mi'kmaq people's golden tablets is what they're finding, all right. Also like to invite you over to my Patreon page. You know, if you'd like to support me that way, if you like what I do, you can go to patreon.com/Kurimeo. And we got some exclusive great videos right now. I mean, the Don't Mention the Chazar series is really hot. This video, the last part, number 27, is about 2 hours long. Great episode. I mean, they're all great. If you guys check out the comments, it's a lot of comments here. Part 26, almost 3 hours long. You know, this is the Chazar job. A Chazar job, you know, I can't say too much. It's a whole hour-and-a-half presentation. I mean, after you watch that, you know who's involved for sure. Number 25, almost an hour long. Don't mention Chazars. Number 24, don't mention the Chazars is here. Almost an hour and 17 minutes. All right. And don't mention the Chazars part 23. All these are exclusive. Full. This is 48 minutes. All of them exclusive in my Patreon page. And shout out to all the patrons, of course. And of course, I share a lot of books here in the Patreon. This is one of them. I share a lot of great books here. Research into Lost Histories of America. All right, this is another one. And some exclusive little updates and videos I do. And this is my PowerPoint presentation I did on Old World, Florida. I just shared it right here. I didn't get to really play it on his channel. The video wasn't working. And some more books. All right. But again, you know, just go ahead and check it out if you're interested, and that's one way to support me if you like. I'm gonna go ahead and leave it there, guys. Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you found the information interesting. You know, take it how you want, do with it what you want, conclude what you like. I just think it's very interesting, and I think it does connect somehow to the hijack, to what they did and duplicated what they called and glorified so-called Romans and Greeks. All right. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Wow.